Hannah Beth here. Hope you're all going well. I'd just like to deliver this quick, relatively short lecture to discuss with you the difference between blue sky and applied science. So what am I talking about when I say blue sky science? What is that? And how is that important for science today? So blue sky science, also known as pure or fundamental science, is this idea of pure curiosity-driven exploration, following the research wherever it goes, finding anomalies and questioning those and taking them further and seeing what happens. Just following things, although you might not be searching for a known unknown, trying to just follow where the knowledge is taking you. That's blue sky science. So I'm just going to show you a quick clip now. And so blue sky science itself, as I explained, is pure curiosity-driven science. But what does that do for society? So here's a nice example. Echocardiography emerged from this winding curiosity-driven process. So echocardiography, for whom some of you may know, is one of the most valuable methods of cardiac investigation used in medicine today. So in 1830, Galton's whistle was found to produce sounds that went beyond the higher limit of learning. And it wasn't until later instruments that were able to detect ultrasonic rays that the wider value of such a pitch became recognized. In 1913, a physicist called Richardson carried out experiments in testing ultrasound on underwater initially, and that was in these echo ranging schemes, and therefore the knowledge increased. 1917, just 4 years later, this French physicist called Langevin observed that ultrasonic energy could have a detrimental effect upon biological material. So he collaborated with a scientist called Wood, who was working on ultrasonic waves to detect submarines. During the war, Britain and France asked Wood to join their leading scientists. Because of his skills at technical innovation and working on these telescopes, I thought he'd be a really good person to bring in. He met another scientist called Loomis, and they both saw the potential in picking up the work that Langevin had left off. The research that they developed from that revealed that exposure to ultrasonic energy had this powerful impact on displacing material. And then later, there were two brothers called Carl Dusek, a neurologist, and his brother Frederick, who was a physicist. They studied the clinical application of ultrasound, and this was in 1937, just before the Second World War. And they measured the ultrasound beam through the skull. They used this technique to look inside the human body, and in 1942, in the middle of the war, Dusek used this echocardiography to measure phasic volume changes in the heart, finding another really useful function for echocardiography. So the development of echocardiography can therefore be understood as being led from this winding and curiosity-driven process. The input came from physicists, from engineers, whose focus was on solving a problem around the time, but there was an unforeseen path and what it might lead to. But ultimately, this led to the clinical application of ultrasound. So that's pretty useful. Sir Alec Jeffreys, having I think it was just having his morning coffee, had it suddenly at 9:05 on this September morning, sunny I'm sure, when it occurred to him one of the missing links around DNA fingerprinting, which is obviously something very, very applied in society. But he himself has criticisms of the whole process. He has a lot to say, basically, and what a quote from him is this: "Absolutely unashamed blue skies research is what I love, and I've never lost sight of that through all the monstrous inversion of my life. Fun but monstrous, of charging off into the frenzied world and coming back out of it again in the background. I've always kept this fundamental research going. So although it's often a lot easier to get funding for applied science, which I will come to in a moment, but it really is about focusing on the known unknowns. As you know, applied science is about looking at these known unknowns, which has become increasingly tempting for science. But there's a whole lot of really good things that have come out of blue sky research. So a few other really key examples are aspirin and the role and what it can apply to, the structure of hemoglobin, the laser. I actually spoke about that last week, and the LIGO, and how that came from all of the different evolving understandings of physics and relativity, and Einstein, of course, molecular biology, coronary angiography, and the effect of adrenaline on blood pressure. So all of these were incremental things discovered by scientists throughout the ages that led to some world-changing outcomes in science. So a bit of a comparison between blue sky science and applied science. So while blue sky is curiosity driven without a clear goal, applied science focuses research towards a practical endeavor. So the known unknown. We know what we don't know, and we're going to try and answer that question. Blue sky research is used, as I said at the very beginning, interchangeably with the term basic, pure, or fundamental science, whereas applied science is very practical, it's instrumentally valuable, and applies to practical problems. Blue sky research is knowledge or truth for its own sake, with scientists aiming at exploring truth theories about nature and how things work. Again, whereas that's not really the domain of applied science. Blue sky research does develop information to better understand phenomena in the natural world, but often these real-world applications might not be apparent. There's often feedback between applied and basic science, and as I think Jeffrey said himself, he actually does both. So he gets funded for his applied science, but he keeps working on his fundamental, exciting, curiosity-driven science as well. So there's often feedback between the two, but there is this shift occurring, certainly in funding, from this scientific freedom allowing us to just hide in our laboratories and see what happens, to making us do useful things for society, which has some real benefits, but it also has some drawbacks. So this gradual shift is occurring from towards this focus on the known unknown. So this objectives in line with the economy or expectations of society. So science itself is generally, you know, we're funded by government who's voted in by people, by the voters. So ultimately, we've got to keep the voters happy, and they want to see that all of that money poured into science is going to bring something useful for the country. But it better also be in line with their values. So you've got to watch that. So applied science itself is something that the research that I do is often very applied, although some really exciting things have popped out of it as well. So medicine, agricultural science, that's a lot of what I do, education, political science, technological development, history. I mean, a lot of those things are called applied science, but even in education, there's a lot of action research there, and things often just pop out that you didn't expect. So you might be measuring one thing and something else still might pop out. So this random and emergent findings still can come out of applied research as well. So it's not always possible to draw a clear distinction between basic or blue sky and applied research. But typically, the results of applied research are not theoretical statements about the way the world is, but more technical. So if you want to achieve goal X, then you need to do Y. If you want to cure a patient, you ought to use antibiotics. If you want to use maximum destructive potential for your nuclear bomb, you ought to build it like this. Well, there's another issue. But it's coming back to society's expectations. The interests upon which these technical norms are arrived at are not morally neutral. They really are. So we do need to also be questioning, when we're paid to do research, well, what kind of interests ought we to pursue and why? So Both are instrumentally valuable and applicable to practical problem solving, and can be the case even while the primary motivation for seeking knowledge may not be instrumental, but simply pure intellectual curiosity. And by applying these results of Blue Skies research, we can still find workable solutions sometimes not. But there are certainly fears being risen in the scientific community about this excessive emphasis on agenda-driven research, which could potentially jeopardize these wonderful serendipitous advances in science. And Sir David Weatherall has much to say on this. Sir David Weatherall himself is a well-known physician and molecular geneticist, but he says, in the few studies that have examined the origins of the major advances in medicine over the past 100 years, it has been clear that a high proportion of those arose from research projects that had no practical goal in mind, but which were driven by a simple wish to understand normal physiology. The growing tendency for a more goal-orientated approach to the process of scientific discovery has disadvantages. Again, it drives scientists towards work that has predictable results and adds little potentially to the global endeavor of finding out how all this works. So that's all I'm going to cover for this little video, but I look forward to seeing you in the live tutorial